Hello and welcome to the live Q&A with me, Professor Michael Scott. It is the 30th of September and aren't the nights drawing in just that little bit? We're starting to turn towards proper autumn. You can smell it in the air. I hope that you guys have been well and that you have survived the petrol crisis in the UK. I know I've been driving around the forecourts looking desperately for some fuel this week, going up and down towards the university at Warwick because it is also this week Freshers Week. And so the university students have been returning in their droves, and it's so wonderful to see them back on campus and a real atmosphere developing on campus as we return to face-to-face teaching with some safeguards, of course, in place as always. So I hope you guys have been well. Hope you've been able to get around the country as much as you've needed to here in the UK. One unfortunate set of parents bringing their child to Warwick University last weekend ended up actually ramming their car into one of the walls of the accommodation block. I don't know if it was the accommodation block their child was then going into, but I think that's quite a way to make an impression as you drop off your child at university, and I suspect that child wasn't at all embarrassed that their parents had rammed into the accommodation block. And indeed, from the photo I saw from the Warwickshire police, who rather I think were enjoying the incident and tweeted out about it, they had not only just sort of, gently knocked into this wall, they'd actually driven their car sufficiently into this wall to cause the wall to be partially demolished, as well as a window. So well done them. So I think any parents dropping off their children this weekend at university congratulate themselves on having done a fantastic job if they have managed to drop off everyone and get home without crashing into anything at all. So well done. But we have been looking at your fantastic questions as ever. Hello everyone, hello Carrie, hello Teresa, hello Samantha, hello everyone. Thank you so much indeed for joining in. It's great to see you and thank you so much for taking the time. We've been looking at some of your absolutely fantastic questions, and as ever it's been really hard to pick which ones to respond to. Hello to Helen in a wet and windy Cumbria, absolutely as ever. Tell us where you are listening from. It's great to hear where you are listening from around the world. If you're not in a wet, windy and increasingly dark and wintry place, Mark, you're in Cincinnati, do let us know. We won't at all be jealous if you're listening from a beautiful sort of Greek beach or somewhere even perhaps more exotic. That's quite all right. We'll try and hide our jealousy. But I've been going through your brilliant questions, and one of the first one has come in from Leanne Wenban Price, who's been looking at and watching Bettany Hughes' documentaries, new series on Channel 5, and particularly was thinking about her visit to the island of Delos on the Odyssey programme, and thinking about the slave trade that was centred there on Delos. Now, Delos, as many of you know, is one of my absolutely all-time favourite places as an island, both in antiquity, as a sort of cosmopolitan melting pot where people came from all over the Mediterranean world to worship a whole bevy of different gods, but increasingly over time, particularly as you get into the beginnings of the Roman world and the era of the Roman Republic down to the first centuries BCE, it becomes quite a trading emporium where the different groups from different parts of the Mediterranean have their sort of trading houses, if you like, that they bring lots of stuff to trade, including, of course, quite a bit of a slave trade. And Leanne is wondering about the wider role of slaves in ancient Greece. Would most families own slaves, she asks, or just the elite? Were there any slave rebellions? Would they have been able to attend religious festivals? Would they have been expected to work 365 days a year? These are all great questions, Leanne. Who said they were going to be on Delos tomorrow? Tracy, are you going to be on Delos tomorrow? Or are you replying to Latifa talking about the British Museum? If you're on Delos tomorrow, you lucky thing, send us a photo that we can put up on the Facebook page. We would love to see it indeed. So Leanne's question talking about slavery in ancient Greece. Would most families own slaves? Yes, is the answer. Certainly any, of course, citizen families of most of the Greek city-states, we can imagine having at least a slave, and if not many slaves. So very, very much a common practice and absolutely essential part of how ancient society functioned. Within ancient Athens, for instance, population-wise, we think at its max there was about 50,000 male adult citizens. So then if you include citizen wives and children on top of that, and then the slave population, we think Athens got up to somewhere between 200 and 400,000. So you can see how many slaves there were compared to citizens. Famously also in Sparta, They were a very interesting case as a Greek city-state because they took their slaves not from very far afield foreign places that they had captured or defeated in battle and then nicked a whole bunch of people to be their slaves, brought them back to Athens or Thebes or wherever. Actually, Sparta took a very, very different approach, which was to capture and take over the area directly around Sparta, and then to turn that local resident population into their slave population. So they had a slave population that had a real sense of identity because they all came from the same place, as opposed to in Athens where the slaves came from lots of different places. So in that sense, the Spartans were the ones, if anyone in Greece was worried about slave rebellions, and we don't have many major examples of slave rebellions in ancient Greece as opposed to famous ones in Rome like Spartacus et al. It was Sparta that was really worried about slave rebellions because all of their slave population had this communal identity, which gave them a sense of groupthink and willingness to push back. So, in fact, lots of the decisions the Spartans make in all of their lives, cultures, and indeed foreign policy is that they don't want to be too far away from Sparta for too long because they're leaving their slave population unguarded at home and they may rebel. So that's one of the reasons that Spartans were famously not keen on being out and about too far from Sparta and returning home whenever they could. Oh, I'm glad, Tracy, that hopefully things will get better with your connections. The Welsh weather is what's causing the interruptions for you. It sounds like a little bit. Thank you so much, Claire, for jumping in and letting us know that it's fine elsewhere. Do let us know if you're having any problems. Of course, keep letting us know from where you are watching so that we can get a sense of kind of where in the world people are tuning into this Q&A from. So, Leanne, great set of questions. And if you want to find out more about Spartan slave rebellions, then if you have a look for Helot, that was the name for the Spartan slaves, the Helot rebellions, those happened a number of times through Spartan history, and they were pretty fearful of it nearly the whole time. So you can check out more about the Helot rebellions. Oh no, Teresa, it keeps freezing for you in Edinburgh as well. By God, Scotland, Wales, we're all losing bits and bobs of the internet. Perhaps everything is dying on because of the petrol crisis as well. Freezing pictures here in Lancashire. Oh no, maybe this is a bit of an issue then more widely. I apologise. I am not in my usual location, as you've probably worked out. From the backdrop, we haven't got the clock this week, so connection is bad in Alaska, says William. No problems though in South Leicestershire, no problems in northeastern USA, all fine for just north of Cardiff. This is absolutely brilliant. So a great way of giving your locations and telling us about your internet connection, all good as well. Surrey, says Patricia, looks absolutely fine. On the Costa del Dorset for Lee is going well. Well, it looks like there's some really interesting global problems coming through here in terms of connections that are affecting particularly Scotland and Wales and Lancashire at the moment, but Essex, Cincinnati, Costa del Dorset all doing well. We should do a map, a live map of where the connection is good. Byron is buried 400 yards from where you typed in. Thank you so much for that. Wow, what a thought. If you're inspired at any point by some Byron poetry, let us know. Of course, one of my favourite of Byron's is when I can't remember, oh God, the name of the poem completely escapes me now, but isn't it when he jumps into the Colosseum by night and he stands in the emperor's box in the Colosseum and he looks up at the stars and thinks about the sort of leaps of time that stand between him and the ancient past when emperor stood exactly where he stood, as well as of course all the odes to the Grecian urns and all of that sort of stuff. As well as Byron, one has to just make a little note that he did have a tendency when he was travelling in Greece to scratch his name onto ancient temples. Tut, tut, tut. We all know that that's not the thing you should do right now these days. But of course, back in his day, it was absolutely the norm. But yes, if you travel around, you can see Byron's name scratched in to a good number of temples. I think the Temple of Poseidon at Sunion is one of them in just outside of Athens, where you can see Byron's name scratched in, and you can sort of follow through on a Byronic tour of Greece where he's left his mark, quite literally. Good to know, Helen, that things have settled down in Cumbria. So, Leanne, thank you so much for your question. That's absolutely brilliant. The one other thing to say about slaves, and I think I've mentioned this case before, is that there were occasionally examples when slaves actually not only pushed through from being slaves to being free, so they could be freed, but actually then go on to become citizens. So very famously in 4th century Athens, there was the case of a guy called Passion, who was a slave, got his freedom, then actually ended up becoming a banker and becoming the wealthiest citizen in Athens, and eventually being given full male citizenship of Athens. Now, this was clearly an exception rather than something that was going to happen every day of the week, but it did happen. And so we have to imagine kind of, not only could slaves break out of slavery, but also crucially within ancient Greece, that slavery had this real spectrum. You could be the lowest of the low slave, which was the slave who was working for the state in the silver mines at Laurion, for instance, or you could be a very high status still slave, but a high status slave. You could be very well educated, very well trained, and you could be a tutor, for instance, something like that. Latifah's listening on the train. Yes, I suspect it might be something to do with the train there. Brilliant. So thank you very much for that question. Elizabeth Henriksen has been in touch saying you've been watching an old episode of QI, which said that Rome wasn't built on 7 hills but 8, and there are 75 cities in the world that are built like that. So why was this practical, and were there other reasons? Yes, so we all know the story, don't we? The 7 hills of Rome, and around. I'm back. So we've had some problems of wireless connection now as well. Hopefully I'm back as well, and a bit more live with you as well. Let us know if I'm back and you can see and hear what is going on, okay? But so yeah, we're talking about Rome's 7 hills. Now, the problem is, an issue is that actually which 7 they are does also keep changing through time, because there are, of course, more than 7 hills around Rome. The Janiculum, for instance, if you start counting hills on the other side of the Tiber. But which were the 7 hills keeps changing, or included, you could expand it obviously to 8, or indeed just more. So there are more than 7 hills, most definitely, and the story of which are the key 7 hills of Rome keeps changing. But there are lots of cities around the world that have this similar story of hills, or being formed around hills, whether it's 7 or more. And in many ways it makes a great deal of sense, doesn't it? People will start off with habitation on hilltops because it's safer, easier to defend from attack. But it also is kind of how communities, smaller little village communities, end up actually then becoming cities. So we can imagine little communities on little hills around eventually expanding and joining together. So village communities joining together to become a single urban metropolis. That's how a lot of cities come into being as well. And in the particular case in Rome, they were, by being on the hilltops to begin with in terms of settlement, they were avoiding the area around the Tiber, the flat area around the Tiber, because that was actually very marshy and thus absolutely prone to mosquitoes, and as a result, a bad place, an easy place in which to catch malaria. So it wasn't until we get to the time of the kind of end of the sort of Roman kings, so early 6th century BCE, which is when Rome started doing some big monumental building projects down on the flat, particularly creating the Great Drain, the Cloaca Maxima, that runs underneath the Forum and to the Tiber, that would then serve Rome and still serves Rome today as a drain. You may remember we walked down it when we were in Invisible Cities Rome back in 2014. In fact, it's the place where I got a foot infection from walking through effluent that is still going through that drain 2,000 years later, because I had a rather leaky boot and didn't realise that Cloaca Maxima was created partly to take all the rubbish and crap that was being created in Rome as it expanded, but equally to drain the marshy areas around the Tiber, to make them drier and thus more usable by people and less attractive to mosquitoes, and thus less and a higher chance of infection from malaria. So there we go. 7 Hills, Elizabeth Henriksen, thank you so much for your question. Now, we have a good question coming in here. Oh, again, another one related to the Roman Empire, and we'll do this one and then we'll take a break, because after after that, I want to come back and show you some pictures, because Rebecca Louise has asked a question from her students that had me looking at some pictures of vases that I had completely forgotten about and which are an absolute hoot, and I want to show you and share them with you. But Callum Gabriel has asked this question about the decline, fragmentation and disintegration of the Roman Empire. What, in our opinion, is the main reason for the decline of the Roman Empire? Well, Callum, it's very, very hard to pin down to any single one reason, because if only one of these things, one of its problems, one of Rome's problems had been in operation, it may well have been able to cope with it. It was, in fact, the combination of all the different problems that it was faced with all at the same time that really put paid to the Roman Empire, or at least, as we should say it properly, to the Western Roman Empire, because of course in the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire really divides into a western half centered around Rome and an eastern half centered around Constantinople, and that Eastern Roman Empire will carry on and become eventually known as the Byzantine Empire, and survive all the way through until Constantinople falls to the Ottomans in 1453. So you could say the Roman Empire in part survives for an awfully long time and only falls because it actually is conquered. But in terms of the Western Roman Empire, focused around Rome and that kind of disintegration, particularly in the 4th and then early 5th centuries, what we're looking at is a combination of things. There is mass migrations outside of the Roman Empire of what we would call sort of nomadic pastoralist tribes that are moving from the east westwards. Those causing a huge amount of pressure and migration of great numbers that then come streaming in and pushing at the borders of Rome. So that's the Huns, the Visigoths, all of these kinds of things, groups. And they, of course, are kind of a massive threat in terms of kind of fighting at the borders, pouring into the country, taking over parts of the Roman Empire. At the same time, you've got the problem of finances. So the Roman Empire has been financially struggling all the way through the 3rd century and then into the 4th century CE, and it's never again as a result able to afford and pay for so easily the great armies that will defend it when all of those outside groups come rushing in. And then of course it's got the problem of leadership, and I think if I had to pick up one thing, it's the disintegration of kind of good, solid, continuous Roman leadership. That is a massive problem. So kind of when you go through the Roman emperors from Augustus onwards, there are some Roman emperors who've had some pretty good lengthy reigns and a pretty good sense of stability, if not for an individual emperor, then at least for a ruling dynasty. But for example, if you get into the period 235 to 285 CE, 35 to 85, so talking 50 years, there are in fact, I think, around 26 Roman emperors in that 50-year period, some of whom are only serving for a month or two before they are murdered, taken off the throne, and kind of another coup, someone else puts themselves in place, etc. And with that kind of turnover, you simply cannot get the kind of leadership, stability, strategy that you need as an empire then to respond to all of those external threats. So that would be kind of my pick if we had to have one. Afternoon, Anna. Thank you so much all for tuning in. That's absolutely brilliant. So that was Callum Gable's great question about what kind of caused the downfall ultimately of the Roman Empire, or at least the Western Roman Empire. Okay, so let's take a moment to think about some of the other great things that are in the news about the ancient world before we come back to look at some naughty pictures from ancient Greek vases, and I blame Rebecca Louise for all of this. But the things we're going to look at first, so Roman finds in the Limes area in Utrecht. So Roman artifacts have been found in Utrecht. There was once part of lower kind of German area, the limes, the boundary, the lower German limes, the boundaries of the Roman Empire. And this has now been declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site, so this is extremely exciting. Then, of course, amateur freedivers have discovered 53 perfectly preserved Roman gold coins while clearing rubbish off the seabed of the coast of Alicante. Right, so this is absolutely brilliant. So for amateur freedivers, absolutely, not only is this underwater archaeology at its best, but it's people kind of exploring and finding the ancient world for themselves while doing a good community service of cleaning up the seabed just off the coast of Spain. And they found 53 gold coins said to be in a perfect state of conservation, which hopefully will be studied, and we'll learn more about them soon. If you are anywhere near Cambridge right now, you must get to the Fitzwilliam Museum to see their Gold of the Great Steppe exhibition, which is absolutely mind-boggling. We so often forget the extraordinary sophistication, technological skill, and just exquisite artifacts and objects that belong to the groups, the nomadic pastoralist groups that lived across the steppe, both from the west on the eastern edge of the Mediterranean all the way through to the borders of the ancient empire of China. Now, these groups, they don't build massive buildings, they don't build big cities. It's not their style. They're nomadic pastoralists. They move constantly, but that doesn't mean that they don't have exquisite and extraordinary material cultures. And you can get a sense of that at this exhibition at the Fitzwilliam Museum. So do, if you can, get along to the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. I thoroughly recommend it. And then talking about what's on, well, a couple of things that we're involved in Warwick, because we are gearing up for the new academic year with lots of stuff going on. There's a couple of talks by me coming up about the Ancient Olympics, following on from the Tokyo Olympics this summer. So one in Bristol, kind of Bristol on the 12th of October. That's in person, I think. So do, if you're in the Bristol area, come along on the 12th, or online, coming out from Aberdeen on the 9th of November. And then I'm also doing an event for a Canadian-based drama group about considering drama, and we're going to be talking about Antigone and the challenges of staging Antigone from the perspective of trying to help a modern audience understand what an ancient audience would have found the most shocking and the most difficult. Now, that's an online talk, absolutely free to attend, and all the details are on the Facebook page and on the website, but that will be on the 23rd of November. Obviously, it depends where you are in the world, but it's going to be in the afternoon UK time, and then kind of work back to wherever you are from there. And then through into January 2020, 27th and 28th of January, the Warwick Drama Festival will be returning, and they are performing. So the Warwick Classic students put on an annual production of an ancient Greek play on the main stage of the Warwick Arts Centre, and you can come and watch in a live public performance, Euripides Bacchi it will be this year, with talks surrounding that as well. So do come along and be part of that. Lex, if your hometown, is that Bristol? Is that Aberdeen? Hopefully we can catch up. Do come along and say hello. And then, of course, if you are thinking about applying for classics at university, come along and say hello to the Warwick Open Days. We've got a virtual open day on the 27th of October, and I'm going to be giving a taster lecture at that. And then there's an in-person one on the 6th of November. So look forward to hopefully seeing you at one or two of those. Lots of other events going on, and of course we signpost them all on the Q&A on the Facebook page, so do keep an eye on those. A couple of podcasts assigned to you. History Hit, as always, doing great stuff with the ancient world, and there's also a new History Hack podcast talking about virtual reality and what virtual reality can do to help us recreate lost worlds. And as you know, I have a great interest in the virtual, so do have a look into that. Do catch up also with the recent In Our Time on Herodotus. Melvin Bragg and guests was doing absolutely brilliant stuff with Tom Harrison, Esther Idenau and Paul Cartledge. Absolutely, a triumvirate and of men and women that cannot be matched. Absolutely brilliant. And then, of course, do have a look. There's a new research collection on the battles of Thermopylae and Salamis, of course, celebrating their big anniversaries this year in 2021, because, as we all remember, even though they rule in 480 BCE, there is no 0 BCE, so that means that actually if you want to go forward 2,500 years from 480 BCE, you have to add a year this end of the spectrum. That's why we're celebrating in 2021. And that's a new collection that is free to access from Cambridge University Press until the 31st of October. So you can indulge your love of everything Salamis and Thermopylae. And then back to Warwick, we have our Material Musings blog, which is absolutely brilliant this week. It's about a wonderful kind of it's all about an investigation that was carried out by the Soprintendenza, so the Italian archaeological unit in the town of Todi, which is in Umbria. And it's a structure from the late 2nd century AD, and kind of they have inscriptions relating to ritual burial of a lightning bolt. I absolutely love this. The ritual burial of a lightning bolt. And this idea that if you got struck by lightning in the ancient world, it was actually extremely lucky because it meant that you'd been touched by the gods. You might have been killed by it, but hey, you had been touched by the gods, you lucky, lucky, lucky devil. And here they seem to have tried to get that luck and sort of hold it in for the local community by giving the lightning bolt that had struck the ground some kind of ritual burial and thus permanent place in their community. What a brilliant conception and idea. Right, okay, now, Rebecca Louise, this is all your fault. Question from your student. You had some students in the Ashmolean Museum, and they were asking, why does Odysseus look so fat and funny on this cup? Now, I've been having a look, and I think if I show up this picture, it will be shown in reverse, won't it? But this will give you a sense, I think, is the one that you were looking at. So shout out if you are online with us, Rebecca Louise. Let us know if this is the picture that your students will be looking at. So it's here we go. If I zoom out a little bit, there you go. Greek cup, there we go. But look at the figure of Odysseus. Look how fat and big bummed he is. And if you're more adult, look at the sort of odd way in which his appendage has been shown as well. As he is running across the sea, but he's not on a boat. He's actually on two amphorae that are put side to side, but there's a good old fish there in the corner. And you can see just there in the corner, that is an impression of Boreas, one of the winds that is pushing him along. And there's Odysseus, just in case you didn't recognize him either. Right, yes, so he looks fairly ugly, doesn't he? And now that's the one that Rebecca Louise and her students were looking at in the museum, but it is not alone, because this one, another one of my personal favourites, is in the British Museum. And here we have, this is a Skiphos, and you have Odysseus with a sort of rather dodgy looking hat on, sort of tin hat saved from World War II. Very, very fat again and podgy, with some excellent man boobs, odd appendages again, holding a bit of a funny looking sword in one hand, cloak over his arm, and he's being offered something in a drinking vessel, in a skiphos, by a lady who's mixing it with weaving going on behind. That's a loom weights on a loom there on the left. And this figure we think is Circe, which of course is the person that Odysseus ends up being shacked up with for several years and sort of losing his way home. Now, why is Odysseus looking so absolutely awful in both of these pictures, given he's supposed to be a hero? Well, these are both examples of Boeotian ancient drinking vessels, and different styles of painting there were, of course, in all the different regions of ancient Greece. So most often we think we're looking at Athenian vase painting, and that's the most famous by far, but actually all the different areas of Greece had their own styles and ways of doing things. And Boeotia, capital city in Boeotia is Thebes, had its own particular way of doing things. And one of the things that Boeotians liked to do in terms of their vases, they always had a bit of a wicked sense of humour, the Boeotians, in that sense, is that they loved vase paintings not showing people in heroic garb and heroic stance and heroic physique, as the Athenians always did, but actually these images are all supposed to mimic the kind of tragic comedy satyr plays that were put on in the theatres, that were kind of a ritual kind of comedy structure that often followed tragedies in order to lighten the mood a little bit. And they were effectively sort of satyrs, so half men, half goats, that would run around being the choruses and sort of reacting stupidly to all sorts of very difficult and weighty and epic problems. But unlike the people in the tragedies who would be taking it all seriously, they wouldn't at all. And they would be wearing lots of really ridiculous costumes that then morphed more and more into comedy as well. We see this in comedy as well. So in lots of of the artistic representations of Aristophanic comedies that we see on vase paintings, people, particularly older people, have got big bums and big bellies and all sorts of weird appendages. So if you look again at this one from the British Museum and you look closely at, hopefully the camera can keep this in focus, Odysseus's face, you see it very much there looking like a theatrical mask. And you can sort of see the cutouts for the eyes and the cutout of the mouth for the person to talk through. But the beard and the sort of excessive appendages give him that sort of comedic satyr approach, whereas the sort of big bum and everything else makes him look a bit like a silly old fool that we would expect to see in comedy. So this is Boeotians wanting some drinking vessels to have a drink from on a Friday night when they're relaxing and kicking back, taking the mick out of their epic stories and epic cycles, and having a bit of a laugh at the expense of the hero Odysseus. And that, I think, is absolutely wonderful to see, that this wasn't a group of people who were always super serious and super kind of focused on kind of being the best of the best of the best, that even they knew how to kick back occasionally and just have a giggle. So, Rebecca Louise, thank you so much for asking that question and reminding me about this fantastic set of vases. If any of you come across any more like this, do let us know and send in pictures to the Facebook group. It would be lovely to share some more of these kind of wicked, fun, relaxing kind of take the mick vase images that perhaps we should be thinking a little bit more of as part of the ancient Greek world. Okay, well, we are out of time already, and we didn't even get a chance to get to Linda's question about the victims of Herculaneum, but we will get there next time, Linda, I promise you. And when is next time, I hear you ask? It will be in 2 weeks' time, on the 14th of October at 5 p.m. So we will see you on Thursday, the 14th of October at 5 p.m. UK time. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's been absolutely lovely to be with you today. I'm sorry if you've had any problems and connections joining, but hopefully you can watch it on catch up on the Facebook page or on YouTube as well, if that was the question. Linda's off to the Fitzwilliam Museum. Do get in there if you can. And in the meantime, stay safe. Have a wonderful next couple of weeks and look after yourselves. And I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.